The number one thing that happens when we compare our loss is that we don't give ourselves permission to grieve. We start to feel so bad for our neighbor who's also lost their husband and so worried about her because she seems like she's not doing well. And even though the person that I lost wasn't as close to me as her husband, because now I'm comparing, I start putting my grief down. I stop sharing my grief. I stop talking about my grief with others because I minimize the grief, because I haven't given myself permission to go there with the grief. You don't give yourself permission to grieve when you are more concerned about someone else's grief. And the only reason you're more concerned about someone else's grief is because you're comparing your grief. This can happen in the same family where the same loss has taken place. It can happen between a husband and a wife. It can happen between a mother and her other siblings. The son who's still alive feels that he should protect the mom, so he doesn't share his grief with her. He starts to compare his loss to her. The wife who's crying all the time, who seems like she can't stop crying, and the husband who doesn't show his tears at all in her presence, they now start comparing their grief to each other. So now one of those two is gonna not grieve at all. Grief is yours. It doesn't belong to anyone else. Your grief is yours, 100%. You need to take control of it. You need to own it, and you need to allow it. Don't let anyone talk you out of it. You have permission to grieve 100%. You have permission to do your own grief, and it's going to take as long as it takes. And that's the end of it. Period. Don't compare your loss to someone else's. And don't compare the types of grief. There are a lot of grief groups out there that are only for spouses. They're only for a loss of a child. They're only for abortion. They're only for miscarriage. They're only for if your son has decided to change his sex. Grief is grief is grief. Your heart is broken. It's grief, my friend. Allow your grief.